All right, we're talking about models and model binding. Multi-select. Which of these are true about the model in an MVC pattern? Yeah, good job. Yeah, it's easy to think of the model as just kind of being synonymous with the data itself, but it's not. It's just how we define how the data gets structured so that the application can use it, and also how the data is stored, which will become a lot more obvious when we start working with databases. All right, Amadeus. I love it. What is a POJO? Kind of a gimme. Yeah, good. Plain old Java object. True or false? An object instantiated from a model class is a POJO. That's true. You know, the model in a MVC, Spring Boot project might have a lot of extra syntax in it, annotations and all those kinds of things in order for it to work with the controller and the templates. But if once an object is instantiated from that class, it's just a plain Java object. It has, properties and methods, and that's it. So it could be used anywhere. All right, Maple takes the lead. Order the basic parts of a model class. Ten seconds. Good. So yeah, it's the same as you are accustomed to ordering a Java class. Fields for IDs and properties go up top, then your constructor, then your getters and setters, and then any custom methods. And if you introduce any sort of instance methods, those would go below that. So, all right. It only gave me four options. Brad's in the lead. True or false? Data should be stored in the controller once it is received from a form in a post request. False, good, yeah. The very first class we had, we did store the data temporarily in like in an array list in the top of the controller, just because we hadn't gotten into models yet. But in this last class, we talked about how data really shouldn't ever be stored in the controller. So that's why we had created a data layer to kind of take the place of a database and store it there instead. All right, quiz. What does CRUD stand for? You guys are learning this early. I don't think it actually comes around till chapter 17, but. All right, good. Create, read, update, delete. It's all of the operations that you would normally do with data, especially when you're talking about putting things in or taking things out of a database. Okay. Which is not true of a data layer class? Good, yeah, majority of you got it. So objects cannot be instantiated from a data layer class. Everything is static. We create a map to, store each of the objects with their IDs as keys to make it easy to find them. And it has static methods to do those CRUD operations we talked about, like adding and deleting. And it does remove the responsibility of data storage from the controller, which was our temporary solution until we start working with databases. All right. True or false? Model binding allows us to have a single parameter representing multiple properties in a post handler in the controller. True. That is 100% true. If I'm not mistaken, the next question will be related to that. Yeah, what is the correct annotation to use for that parameter in a post handler when you use model binding? Good, yeah, model attribute. You got it. All right, Brad's still in a strong lead. Let's see how this goes. True or false? With the model attribute annotation, Spring Boot automatically instantiates an object using matching query parameters. That's true. That's what makes it so handy. You can just, name the parameter as a new object of that class, and boom, you've got something that you can pass down to your template, and it'll automatically grab all the getters and setters when it needs to, grab the properties out of it and all that sort of thing. So it's super great. And if you don't remember what that looks like from last class, we're going to be working in and around that again tonight, so you get to see it again. All right, let's see who we got. Third place, Shweta, nice. Turtle, second place. Brad in first place. Good job, Brad. Jamie and Jay Rolls as runners up. Okay. All right, let me stop sharing for a second. And Colin is going to do announcements.
Well, yeah, I don't have too much to go over today. I wanted to first reiterate that we're having a panel on Monday of former LaunchCode grads. And then the rest of the session is going to be a catch-up day. And then we're going to have a few more guest speakers in March. So we'll have a couple opportunities to ask some questions, people with experience in the industry, and get some networking in, and try to orient yourself with what the next couple of months could be like for you, and plan accordingly in terms of preparing yourself for your career. Other than that, I think that's it. Of course, get with your TAs or get with me if you have any outstanding assignments and you are looking for a catch-up plan. Alexandra, I just saw a hand go up. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, what's the due date on graded assignment number 3?
The due date on graded assignment number 3 is 3/9. So March 9th.
Okay, cool. Thank you. It's listed as March 3rd on on the website, but I just wanted to make sure.
Canvas, yeah. I think Carrie's got a slide that says the proper due date. I'll get that adjusted on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so the due date for that assignment will be March 9th, and then our final due date is going to be March 30th. So please plan accordingly. And that's it from me. Carrie, back to you.
Alrighty. Okay, let's get going on our lecture. Okay, so we are talking tonight about model validation and enumeration types, building on what we learned in the last class about models. We're going to do announcements. I got a couple of things on my slide that Colin didn't mention. And then we're going to talk about each of those topics, and then you'll do studio, and then we will come back for studio review. Okay, so this was about graded assignment 3. It is due the 9th, Monday the 9th. And you know everything you need to know to complete it as of tonight with these topics that we're talking about tonight. The alumni panel Colin mentioned is on this coming Monday, and it's the I'm sorry, 3/9 is a Thursday, isn't it? The following Monday is the catch-up class. Before the 9th, that's on the 6th. Okay, so starting next Thursday, we're going to have a new class format. In response to my own feelings, and then also the feelings of a lot of you, we don't have enough lecture time. Like, there's just a lot to get through, and it ends up being a little bit rushed. I'm not able to take as many questions as I would like to. So we're going to start doing this through the rest of this unit, where from 5:30 to 7:30, we do a quick Kahoot quiz, we do announcements, and we do lecture. And then you have a short break and you go to studio for the rest of class all the way to 8:30. And then I will have a pre-recorded review up by the end of class time, so that you can watch it at your leisure later. And then if you have any questions, throw them in the lecture questions channel in Slack, and I will, keep an eye out for that. But I think this is going to buy us some of that time in a way that's going to be the most useful for everybody who's, around in the first half of class. So that's that announcement. Okay. Let's talk about model validation. Okay, so user input validation is important. I'm going to talk about that for a second. And then we'll kind of lay out how we go about implementing it officially with Spring Boot in the model, in the controller, and in the view. Take them one at a time. So validation, if you have incomplete or, just bad data, incorrectly formatted, it's going to cause errors down the road. So you want to catch it before it does. Things like, a blank or an empty value, a number that's out of range, an email address that's not, complete or improperly formatted, some sort of, password that doesn't meet security criteria, usually because it's not secure enough. And there are rules for that. A string that contains unusable, characters that aren't allowed for whatever reason. So you always want to verify that the input meets those conditions or restrictions before you store it. So, here's some examples: empty string, a blank, which, people sometimes don't realize is there. So you have to catch that. -3, maybe it's, a partial address, this password that's not strong enough, characters not allowed. Yeah, you get the idea. So there's two ways to do validation, client side and server side. And client side validation, of course, is done on the front end before you even submit the form. This would be things that are either like built into HTML attributes, like you can actually put min and max on like an input element, for example. And that way the browser won't even, allow submission unless those things are taken care of. Front-end frameworks have a lot of built-in tools. Angular has a significant built-in like validation system that's actually pretty cool. Allows you to do a lot of cool interactive things with the way you give user feedback. Server-side validation, on the other hand, takes place in the back end after the form submission. So the data has been sent to the back, but it's before you store it. You want to, check it at that point. And you really want to do it on both sides. But with an MVC application like we have, we're going to focus on server-side validation because our templates are actually built into our, server side, and it's, we don't ever update the front unless a call is made to the back. It's not like this first model here where you might have a completely separate framework in the front, and you have a lot of those, extra tools. It's not that you can't do some client side, you're just going to be a lot more limited. But there's a great system for tying this all together between our model and the controller and the time leaf templates. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So the general flow here with the server-side validation is that you define the rules in the model, and then you enable and handle the validation against those rules in the controller. And those are two different things, but they're kind of done together. And then in the view, you can provide feedback to the user. You send them back to the forum and put something on the page so that they know what they did wrong. They know what they need to do differently, and then they can fix it, and resubmit it. So you can kind of see this flow. The user tries to submit something. We get this submission, and then the controller says, okay, let me check the rules in the model. I'm going to decide whether to send them back to the form or decide whether to send them forward to whatever the redirect is at the end of the post handler. And so, it's communicating with the model to check those rules and, find out what the error messages are that are associated with that rules. And then it displays whichever content based on the logic here back to the view. And so that's kind of the flow. It's a big circle, essentially. So let's do these one at a time. Oh yeah, and this was something that wasn't really covered in the book, I think, because the coding events project that you guys are kind of working on as part of the code along with Chris's videos. They had a new branch for you as starter code, and they already had it implemented. But you want to make sure that you've got the right dependency, or none of your validation annotations or anything, it's not going to be able to find them. So I'm going to show that to you. Over here in the build.gradle file, you'll see that I've got this line here. It looks just like the time leaf and web ones. It just says validation instead. So just make sure that's in there, and then rebuild your app. And then it should allow you to do the work that we're going to do tonight. So I'm going to close that now that I'm done with it. So let's go ahead and get started with the annotations in the model. So the first thing to do is to decide what fields do you want to validate, and on what basis. And then there's like different ways to do that. So we'll kind of talk about this. Basically, everything's done with these annotations. I'm going to give you some examples in a second. And some of them require arguments, some of them don't. However, they all have an optional argument to put a message in, like a nice message that you can pass all the way through the controller to the template and display for the user for that specific field. And it's highly recommended that you do it this way because it's much, much better user experience to say something very specific for that field. And so this is a great way to do it. You can apply more than one annotation to a field. So sometimes you want to do several, different checks on it. But keep in mind that adding these annotations just defines the rules. It does not enable validation. So that's what we're gonna do in the controller. So that'll be next. So common validations, and that should say annotations, common annotations. Size is one, and it can take a min or a max. You could only use one of those if you want to. And then of course the message. And all of these, you have to actually have the name of the parameter equals, and then give your value after that. You can't just put the value in. So with min, if you want to just do min and just do max, I have found that I don't like to do it. If I'm going to do both, I'm going to use size, because otherwise, if it catches one of them, it still displays the error message for both. And that's not very useful. So I tend to err on the side of just having a single message that says what the range is that covers the min and the max. And I'll show you an example of that later when we code it. Email, you just give a message. It just checks for, email format. Not blank, just making sure they don't try to submit something that's blank if you need it to have a value. And not null, if it just doesn't even have anything at all. So let's, which would really be more of an indication that you didn't even try to get input for that, but it's still required by the model. Josh, you got a question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm a slide late. Going back to where you said we add the validation dependency. And
Oh, yeah.
then whenever we build it in Spring, is that like a dependency we add on the website there when we make it?
You can. You can add it up front by just searching for it in the dependencies on the start.spring.io.
Just like the validation, whatever comes up when we.
Yeah, I would just search for validation, and then, this is the one you would choose. Yeah, I had, because I'm building this a little bit at a time, I had to come in and just add it here and then just rebuild my app. But yeah.
Okay. There's just one coming up whenever I search it, so I wasn't sure. It's like bean validation with Hibernate validator.
That's for use with certain setups with databases. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I just need to look. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. All right. So this is the very first step. Is defining these rules. So let's go do this. And we're going to kind of go back and forth between the slides and the code here, take it a little bit at a time. So if we go over here to my artwork .java class, where we've defined, the title, the artist, the time period, we can actually say, okay, which of these would we want to say is always required? And so we don't want to ever allow them to be blank. We want to specify that they have size restrictions, that sort of thing. And, for these purposes, I've decided title should not be blank. So I'm going to say not blank. And you'll notice it just added, I tabbed over and it added this import statement up here. So you kind of have to do that just like you do with, other types of classes and things you're importing. And then I'm going to use the parameter that's just the message for this one, because otherwise it's pretty self-explanatory. And I'm just going to say title is required, nice and short and sweet, not unfriendly, not overly flowery. It'll work, right? It's utilitarian. Okay. And then for artist, we want to make sure that it's not any smaller than 2 characters and it's not any greater than 30 characters. Let's just say we have that restriction for some reason somewhere else that's driving this. So we could say, in this case, we'd want to use size. And I can say min equals 2, max equals 30. And then I'll do my message equals something like, artist name must be, I'm not gonna say between because that confuses people. Then they think it's 30 to 29. So 20 to 30 characters long, semantics, right? Okay. And it looks like I forgot to import that. So let me do that. There we go. Okay, so this one now will validate on multiple things here. It'll make sure that it's not too small, make sure it's not too big. I actually had a situation a few months ago where I was working on a sign up form, where somebody puts in their email and their password. And I was working on, I was using a Svelte front end, and I think it was a Java backend, but I didn't work on the backend team. So I reached out to those guys because I was like, I'm trying to make sure we cover all the error handling for all the possible error codes that come from the backend when we make the call to try to submit this stuff. But I realized we're not providing any sort of front end validation. And I don't know what your restrictions are on what is the length? Is there a minimum length or a, maximum length? Actually, we had the minimum length defined in some rules in a file, in a TypeScript file, but I didn't know the max. And so they actually had to look in the database and look at the stored procedures, and they finally found it. And it said, yeah, it can't be more than 50. So I was like, well, 50 would be a really long email address, but sure. So I added it on the front end, did my front end validation and made sure it wasn't longer than 50. But yeah, and they did have some, some validation on the back end for one of the fields, but not for both. And they were like, oh, hey, maybe we should fix that. So this is the kind of thing that you work through when you're building something new. Okay, so that's it. We've got that. If we, go up and run this now, we can run it, and it's not going to do anything because we've only defined it. You'll notice this looks a little different. I changed the colors, but the fonts, but I can go here and say I want to add something, and I can try to add it, and there's no validation, even though we added that definition, because we have to go to the controller and we have to enable it and we have to handle it. So that's what we're going to do next. So if we're going to come over to the slide, talk about it first, and then I will show you how to do it. So you want to use this @valid annotation on the parameter in your post handler. That's the first thing. That's what activates the validation process. So it'll go and it'll check the rules. But if you don't handle it, the user's still going to just get sent. It's going to say, okay, that's not allowed, but it's just going to send them to one of these ugly white label error pages. So we can do that first part, and we can demonstrate this. So I'm going to come over to the controller. I'm going to find my, so here's my get, here's my post. So we've got the post handler for the add art form page. So right here, after model attribute, I'm just going to add one more annotation there, valid, so that any of the fields and artwork in the model that have annotations that have rules defined, it's now going to check them. It says, okay, I'm going to go check them. So let me stop and restart. We'll come back over here and go back to the form and try it again. And we get the ugly page. So we have activated it. We have not handled it. So let's handle it. So first you need some logic, and you're going to make use of this errors object. There's a class called errors that we also add as another parameter in that post handler. And then we can use this method of the errors class called has errors that returns a Boolean. It just says, yes, it has errors, or no, it does not. So we can use that and set up an if else statement. And then that will help us decide what the routing is going to be. Are we going to send them back to the form, or are we going to store the data and redirect them to the next page because everything's cool? So that's kind of the first part. But you also want to provide a good user experience, right? That's what UX stands for, in case you guys didn't know that yet. Sometimes I forget that you guys are still learning these things. Handling validation isn't just about routing, it's about user experience. So we can use that, model class and use the add attribute method to pass in the data object. Now that we have whatever it was that they had input, let's say they had filled in some of the fields, we'll pass that back in so that those input fields will actually still have those same values already filled in. They don't have to do it all from scratch. And then you could send a generic error message at this point that just says, hey, there's some errors on the page. But it's really better to make use of all of those custom defined messages that we did in the model on a per field basis. And that's what we're going to do after this. But let's do this part first so that we're not, just lots of bullet points too much all at once. Let's do some coding. All right, so we are in the controller here. We have added the validation to enable it. Now we need to actually handle it. So I'm going to add this errors class and just call it errors. And I failed to create annotation errors. Why is that not automatically coming up? Oh, I tried to do it as a annotation, didn't I? Yep, sure did. Okay. It's a class, it's just a class, it's not an annotation. Yes, so now we have this errors object that will be provided that'll have all of the information about what went wrong according to the rules in the model. It's kind of all encapsulated in this. So here is where we then set up this thing. We're going to say if errors has errors, and then we can say, you know, send back to form else. And this is where we actually do, you know, what we really want to happen, which is for the data to be saved to our data layer, to that map we created, and then to redirect them back to the collection page where they should see the list of artwork, and their new thing should be included in it, right? So this is the part where we need to actually handle some sort of feedback for them. We need to, you know, send them back to the form instead of to the collection page. So let's see, I said there were two things that we needed to do, right? And for both of them, we're going to need the model class. So one more parameter, model, like you've used before. So the first thing will be model add attribute, and then I'm just going to pass in artwork under the name artwork. And that way, that, you know, that automatically has all of those fields that correspond to the different input fields encapsulated in it because of this model attribute with the model binding that we talked about last class. So that takes care of that. And then if we wanted to have some sort of generic error message, I can show you how that works. We could add attribute. We could say, I mean, you could just pass errors as a whole, honestly, and then use some of its stuff there. But why don't we, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, I'll do that. All right. So then the last thing is it expects a return statement here. So we have to say we want to return them to collection/add art form, because that's the template we're sending them back to. And then both of these things will be available in the template. So we'll be able to go over and work with that. So let's see if we come over here real fast to add art form. Yeah, so I could put some sort of, you know, message here real fast that just says, you know, th if. So we only want this display if there's an error on the page. So we would say first, if errors exists, because if this this page tries to load based on the get handler, this doesn't exist, right? So we have to kind of check that first, otherwise it's going to have an error. And then we would say if errors has errors. And both of those would have to be true for this to show up. And then we can say th text equals, and we could do something a little fancy if we wanted to. That's something like, let me finish this so it, you know, isn't unhappy. Okay, we could do something like there, nope, I have to put this in quotes. There are plus errors dot get error count, I think is what it is. Let me double check that. Yeah, get error count. Cool. There are all kinds of things available to you in this errors class. It's actually pretty cool. So let me come back over to the template. Get error count, and then, you know, plus, and then errors. And, you know, that's somewhat helpful. It lets them know there's errors, but it's not the same as telling them exactly what's wrong on each field. So we'll do that next. Let's see, I gotta close that off, and then I think it's good. So let's stop this and restart it. Okay, so now when we come back to this, we should find that, yeah, we get this little message here. And I do actually have a class for this. Let me add it. That would make it red. So Yeah, so that's pretty much it. But again, it's only so helpful, right? So let's also actually before I forget, I'm going to show you. So if I put in Mona Lisa and then I try to add it, ooh, it did not actually. Oh, it's because I forgot to bind it. Yeah. Okay. The part about being able to have to have this artwork object, refill, pre-fill it with whatever they had before. We haven't done the work in the template for that yet. We're going to do it in a second, and then that part will work. But that was just to say it's important to make sure that you pass that back in if you want that functionality. And then you'll see how it works once we finish the work we're doing in the template. Okay, did I see a hand up? Somebody still have a question? Okay.
You answered it. Thank you.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, so here's the view part, and this is where we'll make it all come together. You have to kind of prepare the view for binding to each field. And I say it that way because we are going to actually make changes to both the get handler and the post handler, even though the get handler is when it first loads the page and it doesn't even have any interaction from the user yet, but we have to put some stuff in there for this to work. So adjustments need to be made in all three places though. So in the model, we're going to add a no arg constructor that doesn't initialize any of the fields. That's actually not correct because I'm going to make it initialize the ID kind of the way that I did in the studio review last time. We're going to separate that out. So we can come over and we can do that. Down here, we've got, yeah, here. Add a no arg constructor. So public artwork, and then that's it. But I'm going to move this .id equals next ID, and then this incrementation of next ID up into here. And then from here, I'll just call it so that when we do actually instantiate an object from this with values, it goes ahead and creates that ID and then sets those three. But that way, this should kind of prevent most errors. But it allows us then to actually create an empty object of sorts. I mean, all it'll have is an ID. It'll have null values for these three. But we need to do that for the next step, which is that in the controller, we want to go to the get handler. And we want to use that model method add attribute to pass an object, but an empty object, because the page just needs to already know what the fields are going to be able to bind it ahead of time. So let's go do that. We'll go over to the controller, and this time I'm looking for my get handler here for add. I'm going to add that model class and then use model.attributes, add attributes to say, artwork, and then what is the name of the variable in the template. And then I'll just pass new artwork, just like that, empty. And that's all that's needed for it to say, okay, I know what the fields are now. And so in the template, you can now refer to them, and I can load the page, without having any values for them yet, and it'll be cool. So that's the third part. In the template, we're going to replace our type and name attributes. And if we have an ID, we'll replace that as well. With th field, this is another new timeleaf attribute that basically it replaces all three of those, and it lets you use a variable expression to bind to the field that matches that's in the model, which we just passed in with the get handler. So like I said, the page first loads, it'll be able to go ahead and bind to those fields. And because it replaces the name and the ID attribute, it kind of makes it a lot cleaner too. And we can actually look at that in the DevTools. So let's come do it first. We're going to come over to our template. And yeah, you can see here that on my inputs, I've got an ID equals title, type equals text, and name equals title. I can replace all three of these now and just say th field equals, use a variable expression, And then inside that variable expression, now that I've passed artwork in, I can just say artwork dot title. And then I can do the same thing here. Before I do the next one, I want to point something out. You'll notice that I'm using this syntax of using for equals on the label because I have separated the label instead of wrapping it around it. If you want to have that functionality in the browser where you can click on the label and it puts the field into focus for you, so you can just start typing, which is a really nice feature to have. If you don't wrap the label element around the input for styling reasons, then you can use this for, and it will actually provide that same functionality. The trick is it has to correspond to an ID. So you can see IntelliJ is a little unhappy on these two now that I've added TH field and taken the ID off, because it's saying, hey, you don't have an ID and you need an ID for this because they have to match. But it's okay, because you have to remember that this is just a template. It's not your final HTML that's going to be rendered in the browser. So once TimeLeaf is done interpreting all of this and it turns it into something with an ID, this will be fine. So it's going to compile just fine. Everything's going to be fine. And we'll see it in the browser. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Okay, and this one is period. Okay, so now we've bound those together so that whether the page gets loaded for the very first time or whether we're loading it because we caught an error and we're sending it back as a response from the post handler, it will be able to access the artwork object that we passed in. It'll know what these fields are, and everything is all nice and clean and hooked up. This is just the part about binding it. So let's go take a look at that real fast, and then we're going to actually do the error messages. That'll be the next step. Let me restart this. Okay, so we come in here, we have this, and I can say, Mona Lisa, and I can add this, and it says there's an error, but then it also, still has this pre-filled now, because it knows, knows that that's the field that's associated within the model, and it has that object. So we're good now that it's been bound. So we just need to get those error messages on the page the way we want to. I need to look at something. I'm missing a class here. All errors. That's right. Okay. Let me come back over here. There's another class that I intended to put on here. Yeah, just to deal with some spacing. Okay. It's just a little, it's just a little design thing. Okay. So let's go look at the errors. Let's talk about this. I've got a slide for this actually. Let's do this. Yeah. So if you want these error messages to display like you see over here on the right, where each field gets its own that's very specific and it comes directly from the model through the controller, we will add an element, just an HTML element. A paragraph does. You could use a span, you could use a div, it doesn't matter. And then you're just going to use this TimeLeaf attribute TH errors. And then it gets the same exact value as the TH field for the input element that it goes along with. They both get bound to that field of that object. And it basically kind of works a little bit like a TH if, in that it's only going to display the message if there is an error for that field. So otherwise it just doesn't show up. So we can put this in and see how this works. So right here, I've got the label, I've got the input. So for each one of these, I'm going to actually add the thing, and I want to make sure I do this consistently with the way that I did it before. Yeah, okay, so I just need to make sure I put the class on it. Okay, so I'm going to use a paragraph in this case, and I'm going to give it my class error, so it'll be red. And then I'm going to use TH errors, and this will just let me bind the errors for this that are defined for this field. And that's it. And I don't even have to like do a TH text because that's built into this as well. It basically says it's conditional. I'm only going to display it if there is an error. I know to go get the rule and the message from the rule that's on this particular field. And I know to place it between, is the inner HTML here. So there's kind of multiple things happening. So I'm going to do that on this one as well. And you might remember that we kept period as an optional field. So there's no reason to put an error message on that. I'm only going to do it on the first two. All right, so now let's go do this. And pull this back up, refresh it. Go back to the original form. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, so now it's like I can try to do it with all blanks, and I get message for this title is required, and this one artist name must be 2 to 30 characters long. If I try again, put this in, now that one disappears and this one's still there. And if I just put in, L, it's still going to be there because it's too short. And if I put something in terribly long, same thing, right? But everything still works the way that it's supposed to. Oops. There we go. And, we get everything displayed exactly the way we expect to. When we successfully do it, there are no errors, and it does forward us up, back to the collections page. So that's the whole process. There's different parts in different, it's a little bit in the model, a little bit in the controller, a little bit in the view, but that's how it all comes together. So I hope that I know that there's a lot of details there, but if you kind of do it a couple of times, it really starts to click and you'll be good. Does anybody have any questions though before we move on to enums? Okay, cool. All right, enumeration types. And give me just a second because I need some water. Okay, so enumeration types, also called enums. You'll hear people pronounce that different ways, enums, because of enumeration. I would say I've heard more people say enum than enum, but pronounce it however you would like. So enums are classes. We'll talk about the special syntax involved. It's a little different than a regular Java class. How to assign values to each of your, properties, and then how we kind of connect that in with everything that we just, we're doing in a Spring Boot app. So an enum is essentially just a special type of class, and it allows us to have fixed values so that somebody can just choose from those values, but they can't just put in anything they want. This is really, really great for some things that you want to be consistent for a number of reasons. But, when you allow someone to use a regular input and just put in anything, you can have all kinds of errors, typos, case sensitivity, alternate spellings, or just bad information for whatever reason, that later if you go to make a list of all of the things that you want, stuff doesn't match up. It can get really messy really fast. So for user input and forms, you can use like a select instead of an input and have all the options come from this, enum. And so then they have no choice but to choose one of your values, and that way everything stays really consistent. That's what we're going to do. And it's really important, like, later on down the road, let's say we add a bunch of art to the collection, and then on the collection page, we have, some sort of filtering or sorting. We want to just look at all of the art that is in the Impressionist style. We need for that value to be exactly the same every single time, or else we could have lowercase Impressionism. We could have Impressionism with not enough S's in it. I mean, there could be lots of problems, right? So that's kind of the idea here. And when we get done, it'll look like this. Okay, so first of all, there's some differences with the way you set this up. So every single variable that you declare as one of the possibilities for an enum is listed as a constant, and you use all caps and you use underscores if you have multiple pieces that you need to connect together, as opposed to camel case. They are comma separated, but then you do put a semicolon on the end. And they're static by default. You don't need to add the keyword. So then later you're going to access it on the class name, just like you would any sort of static value. And you can use the constructor, you can set up a constructor and use it to generate these, or to assign these values. So it kind of goes like this. First, you assign a final field to represent the value that you want. In a web app, it's very common to use display name because the whole goal is that you're going to have a prettier name that is what you really want to display on the page. And it's not that all caps, constant variable that you have behind the scenes. So it keeps those separated. So you just create a standard constructor for that field. You have a getter, but not a setter since it's final. And then you call the constructor with each one of these and pass in the value that's what you want to actually be displayed, front facing. So, all caps red in this example is the constant, but the display name then is red because that's what the constructor is giving you. So this is not an example we'll be using in my app. I'll give a different one, but it's a simple example just for putting on the page. So yeah, so if we want to use this in an app, we're going to need to set some things up. I'm going to come over and we're just going to code the class itself first, and then we'll come back and talk about this part. So I'm going to come over to my models folder here. I'm going to add a new class. But when I get to this menu, instead of choosing a regular class, you'll notice that one of the choices down here is enum. It's actually because it is a special type of class and it has a different keyword. So I'm going to call this style because we're going to allow the user to assign different styles for the artwork. And you'll notice here that instead of saying public class style, it says public enum style. So already it knows to treat it a little bit differently. And then for the class itself, I've got several things that I want to add. So I'm going to add Art Nouveau, comma, Baroque, and it's, usually just put them on separate lines like this. Impressionism, Pointillism, and there are like 75 different types of art in the history of art, guys, and I'm not going to put all of them, I promise. I'll just put 5, how's that? And then end with a semicolon. So now we have all of the fixed possible values for the purposes of demonstration. So the next thing is to get things set up so that we can have a constructor that sets the display name for these. So I'm going to say private final display name. Oh, no, string. It's a string display name. And it is complaining probably because there's no constructor yet. Okay, so I will say style string display name. And just, this display name, and I could have used the generator for this, I guess. Totally could have done that. We'll use the generator for the getter. How's that? And then just choose that, say, okay. All right. And that's pretty much all we need, but you'll notice now it's complaining up here, right? Because it's saying, it has a constructor now. And so we need to call the constructor for each of these and pass in that display name in order for it to initialize it. So this one, I'm going to give Art Nouveau. And this one, Baroque. Wow. Oh, good heavens. There we go. Impressionism. And you can see the IntelliJ is pointing out, oh, yes, I recognize this. This is the string display name from the constructor. And then the last one, of course, is Renaissance. Okay. So now I have something nice to display on the page that, isn't this ugly constant name. Okay, so that's setting up this class. That's it. That's all we have to do. And now we have something that the user will only ever be able to choose from one of these 5 values. So over in the model for our artwork class, we actually want to add a new field so that that's one of these values can be applied to an object of the artwork class. So it all starts with the class definition. So we'll hold, make sure it's going to hold one of those values as its own value. We need to, of course, add it to the constructor, add a getter and setter. And if we want to include it in the toString method, we can do that. And that's it for that. So let's go do that. Artwork, here we go. So we're going to add private. And you might think we're going to do string because display name is a string, right? But this is why it's called an enumeration type, because it's a type. So it's a class, and classes provide types. So we're going to just say that this is an artwork. No, a style. We are in artwork. Private style. That's all I need to do. And then it knows, okay, it has to be one of those enum values in there because it's of the style type. So I'll add it here as well. Style, and this dot style equals style. Come down here below period and add getters and setters for style. And I'm not going to bother putting it a toString. It kind of depends on what you need it for. I'm not worried about it. Right now I'm only using that in the list of things to delete, and I don't care about it for that purpose. So that is all you need to do in order to add it to the class, so that it will know how to structure it and know where to get those values from. So now in the controller, we want to go to the get handler and use the model.add attribute to pass this list of possible values from the class, because it really is what it is. It's just it's going to provide that list directly. But we use the values method. So we'll just use class name.values that will provide the list of all of the values that we passed into the constructor, the display names. And is that true? No, it passes in all of the properties. Yeah. So then if you do have validation logic in your post handler, that means you could possibly be sending the user back to the form from there. You're going to have to pass it in there too, or when you get back to the form, they're not going to be in your template anymore. They won't be available in the dropdown or whatever. So both of those things have to be done. So let's go over and do that part, and then we'll talk about how to do the last piece in the template. So we'll come over here to get mapping for the get handler for add. And I'm going to just do one more model.add attribute. I'm going to call it styles plural because this is a list of all the possible styles. And then we're just going to go to the style class. There we go. And say values. And that will grab the entire list of possibilities. And then I'm going to add that exact same thing down here for when we send the person back to the form because there's some sort of error. So it has access to that list as well. So that, that page can get loaded from here. It can get loaded from there. It'll have them. That's the idea. So now let's talk about the template part. There's, for the form itself, you want to make sure you have a select so that it, and use the drop down. You could also do radio buttons. You could do checkboxes. Selects are nice because they don't take up very much real estate on your page. But, it depends on what you're going for. In this case, we're going to use a select, and then we'll use that TH field on the select tag because that needs to be bound to the name of the field name of your object. So this would be artwork.style, right? Because that's the input field for the object of the artwork class. And then you loop over the list for each option. And this is where you're going to use that, the styles is what we'll use that we passed in. And the TH value gets the variable the local variable you set up, style of styles or whatever. But then for the TH text for displaying, that's where you have to actually say like style.displayName so that you're accessing the value you passed into the constructor for that option. So it's kind of two different things, and we have to do each of them. And then if you have these, this information for your artwork objects displayed in other places, maybe you want to display that information now, and we do. So we're going to go to our collection index page and we'll update that a little bit. Okay, so let's do it. Let's go over to, there we go, add art form. So we're back over here in our template for the art form, and I'm We've got things out of order. Here we go. We're getting low on time, so I'm going to go ahead and just grab this and paste it in, and I'll just talk about it for a second, but it's exactly what I just said, basically. Right here. I think I'm going to be missing that. Yep. Okay, so I've got another input item here, and this is just my class for formatting it because I'm just using a little CSS. I've got a label, style, and then I'm using th field. That gives me an ID, it gives me a name, it binds to this style property of the artwork class for that object. And then here's my option where I've, and I didn't use a th blocks and separate out the looping logic. I put it all on one, but that's okay. Th each is, I'm saying we have a style out of multiple styles. This is the list that's passed in. So I have this local variable now to access the value. So this is the behind the scenes value that connects it to all of the choices for those constants. But then for the text that I want to display on the page, I actually say style.displayName so that I can access the value for that constant that's saved in the enum. And once all of that is there, it should be able to display it all for us nicely. So I'm going to stop and restart this. We'll take a look at it. All right, so we're starting over. And yeah, now we have this nice little select, and we have the pretty names for each of our, options, each of those constants that are there behind the scenes. And if we look at, oh yeah, I was going to show you you guys this earlier. If we go here, yeah, let's come to here and look at this. This is an example of, you can see that th field puts the ID and the name on there for us. And then this is where the value you can see is the actual constant name, but the th text gave us the display name here. So just make sure you match those up right, and it should, display the way you expect it to. So then the last thing to do is to head over to the index for this. I've got, this where I want to update it from, let's see, if I can get the right file. Here we go. I'm just going to replace this list item here because I've got it all formatted already in my other file, but I'm just going to add in so we can actually see that artwork.style.displayName. We want to make sure we, again, tap into what looks pretty on the page and not just that constant name. Otherwise, if we had artwork.style, we would see, in big letters, art_nouveau. That's not what we want. So this should display nicely now. So I'm going to stop it and rerun it. We'll see that when we go to the collections page after we add a couple things. This is the last little bit and then we're done. Okay. All right. So no contents to display, but we can come in here and Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci, 1503. Let's just go with 1503. And he's Renaissance. And let's say we add, The Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, which was 1889, I believe. And that is pointillism. Yeah, and you can see now we've got this nicely, done, and we've added the value from that property that was generated from the enum. Okay, anybody got any questions about that before we go into Studio? Enums are super cool, super useful. I'm a big fan. Okay, so let's come over here and talk about Studio for a second. So this is the third and final trip you're going to do with the Spa Day app. Use the same project from before, just switch to user sign up part 2 branch. You're going to add validation annotations to the user class. So, set those definitions in the model. And then modify the controller to use the errors class. Make sure you're passing in, anything you need to pass in, and help with user feedback in the browser. Now, you may have noticed this is in chapter 15, not in chapter 16. So there's actually no enums in this. It's just about the validation. So that's all you really have to focus on. You can head on out and do that. Let's see. You've got, so just to line it out again, Monday, you've got this alumni panel. There's no lecture. Thursday is SQL part 1, and you can do that reading in the SQL separate from the Java unit. It's a different link. You can find that in Canvas. And then you have a catch-up class the following Monday, and then the night that the graded assignment 3 is due is when we're going to cover the second part of the SQL. And so we're going to just be focusing on the database. And I want to encourage you, go jump into this soon, so that you can make sure that you've got everything set up on your computer, because everybody runs into little issues. It's kind of just like when you set up Java and everything for the first time. Some people are going to run into issues. You want to figure that out sooner than later and talk to your TA about it, talk to each other about it, get it working on your machine. And then you'll just be able to focus on learning how to write queries, and set up your tables and everything. And then after that, we will come back the week after that and integrate it all with a Spring Boot project, and it'll be super cool. So that's what's coming down the pike. All right, head off to studio. I will see you at, let's do 8:05.